What's going on, everybody? I have the honor and pleasure of welcoming Brian to an interview slash chat. Uh, I've known Brian for I don't know how many years, but I often tell the story of our when you first interviewed me, and we just like started talking about HashiCorp stuff. It was like 20, I want to say 15, early 2016, and we were
Yeah,
both
something
just
like that.
obsessed with Hashi stuff. And that's it. Like it, the relationship grew from there. We worked together. He hired me incidentally, and we've done all kinds of fun things together. I consider, and I'll say this at the very beginning, just to put more pressure on you to just perform here. I consider Brian someone who's been a mentor to me. While we were working together at several different jobs, and just between two. Um, in addition to just being a friend. So yeah, thanks for doing this,
Thank
man.
you for being a friend, Dave.
Can we do we pat each other on the shoulder now, or is that
Well,
what
I was
happened?
making a friend's call back, but yeah, we
Dude,
can.
what did Leslie teach you nothing? I don't know anything about pop culture, American pop culture. Why are you doing this to me on my own show? God damn it. This interview is over. Um, yeah. Anyway. Yeah, do you want to just like kind of tell a little bit about, you know, how you got into tech and kind of like what your jam has kind of been from a super high level. We'll dive into more specifics.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I kind of got into tech a long time ago. I remember my dad worked for IBM for nearly 30 years before those bastards laid him off. Um, and then he spent another 15 years there. Um, so like way back when I was in like second grade, he brought home like an Apple IIe, and I remember playing around with that stuff and even taking it to like my classroom in elementary school to like kind of show it off. And this was back in the 80s, I guess. Second grade, I would have been eight, so yeah, like 82, something like that.
Have one
Uh,
sitting back there.
do you really?
I
Yeah,
got a
because
fixed
I
view of
I
the
hashtag old.
components.
So really, it was my dad that got me kind of started, and my dad worked for IBM. He then was well for IBM. He worked at Cornell, and we lived outside of Ithaca in upstate New York, where I'm headed this weekend. And so he would little podunk town, and he found a way to get me on a bus, like the bus that ran between the middle of nowhere and Ithaca, which is also the middle of nowhere. And uh, he set me up at a terminal in the 30 Center building in Cornell, and basically I got online and in 90, I graduated in 94, 92 ish, 91, 92.
Amazing.
And so I've really kind of been on the internet before a lot of people knew what the internet was.
It explains so
Um,
much about you. Uh,
and like I remember I was sitting down at a RS 6000 X Windows terminal,
wow.
and like poking around news groups and finding the seedy underbelly of the internet, and uh, you know, uh, you know, downloading and building software. Like I remember running, like period/configure 30 years ago.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
and so just really just kind of poking around and so that was sort of like my introduction to tech,
Cool.
was being really kind of allowed to run free on the internet at a pretty young age, before it was so common. I guess I've never really thought about it like that.
Yeah, no, I think it makes for a slightly different like tech brain when it wasn't shoved in your like when you had to seek this stuff out all the time basically
Yeah.
to get exposed to it. Did you like kind of after that kind of introduction in your childhood, did you immediately know like, oh, this is something I want to keep doing? Did you study something tech related? Are you just doing it to support your motorcycle and car habit? Is
Very much that, and in typical white male fashion, I've continued to fall upwards my
yeah.
entire life. So yeah, I just I come from a pretty privileged background, and we just had all kinds of advantages from just my dad being an only child, being spoiled to death practically. And no, when I went off to college, I wanted to be an engineer of some ilk. And I went to SUNY Binghamton and floundered for 5 years before finally giving up. And so I didn't exactly fail out, but I definitely gave up. And really, like math, I struggled with hardcore, and still do to this day.
You don't strike me as
Yeah,
someone who fears the math. That's interesting.
I don't fear it. I just don't interact with it. This is a math-free zone, Dave.
But it's interesting because I've always figured you had a strong math background because of your kind of like rigorous approach to problems and solving things and moving forward, kind of like breaking things down into solvable bits. It's interesting.
Yeah. No, the math is my Achilles heel, and always has been. And I remember, so I guess I remember the sort of the pivotal moment for me in college was it was supposed to be like a 3-2 program of engineering or physics and physics. Maybe it was like 3 years of physics, 2 years of engineering, or something like that. And I got like to my third semester, and we started talking about the bending of space and time, and I'm like, I stop.
I
Um,
need something. How can I interact with a welding torch and this concept?
um, yeah, so it really was, I really kind of got by on my advantages sort of at an early age. I've been exposed to computers and tools and mechanical things. And in terms of my career, your question is if I was starting over from zero. We'll maybe come back to that. But
Yeah.
in terms of tech, um, I got by on experience. So when I went to college, I was, a pod op, we called them, a pod operator in the computer lab. The lab was a pod, and I remember like my first, that was a job. I don't remember how much actual income, if any, I got from it, but it was definitely like, hanging out with the computers, in the SUNY Binghamton lab, actually in the printer room is where I started out. So I had a VT100 terminal and massive, dot matrix printer sitting behind me, and I would give people their printouts from behind a glass window. It was really perfect for the burgeoning introvert.
Yeah.
Uh,
This glass is a metaphor for the separation from the world outside.
um, and
Cool.
so I kind of, I grew a little bit in that role, and then I did an internship with Lockheed Martin in Owego, New York, from 97 ish, 95, 97, something like that. So I did that for a couple of years, and enjoyed that. That was pretty cool. Also, I had a summer job, which then a couple of years later turned into like sort of my first job outside of college, with a startup, a technology startup in Ithaca called Glyph Technologies, and they were like, they were basically tuning zip drives for digital audio and digital video recording. So
Wow.
remember those, 100 megabyte,
Oh yeah, blazing fast and unbelievable amounts of storage. I
yeah.
remember.
So I started out kind of doing tech support for that, and then I was doing like website stuff and kind of your typical geek computery guy. And so then from there I literally fell upward. Like I moved to Arizona to try something new. I ended up working for Insight, and then after a couple of years there, I moved to Indianapolis and worked for Delta Faucet, and then moved to New Hampshire, and worked for my next string of companies. Now I'm in Virginia, so it's
Yeah,
so I've kind of not done anything with any particular focus ever in my entire life.
that's reassuring for me to hear because it's not something I'm capable of. I'm capable of high intensity short term focus. That's about it.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah, interesting. And like, so what's your situation now? Like, how would you kind of describe your kind of interests and how they've matched up to different jobs you've had over the last, like in the recent, 5 year kind of time span?
So the way that I've kind of always described myself is as a mechanic. I would have I think if I had done anything with any direction at all in my college years, it would have been to get into like automotive technology or really become like an actual engineer. If So anyway, I love working with my hands, although I'm very poor at it. I like working on cars and motorcycles and building them and crashing them and maintaining them and all that stuff. So that's ultimately what I like to do, and my career supports my hobby. Yeah, so I do just I think of myself as a mechanic. I was terrible at all the theoretical stuff, um, but I found that I'm good at sort of problem solving, at integrating systems,
Mhm.
and kind of putting things together that people have already built to an extent.
Yeah.
So that's how I think of my my skill set and sort of my approach to things. Um, and I think that has uh, it's just worked for me. Like
Yeah.
I think the people who are and maybe this kind of really feeds into my uh, what's the word for you think you're not good enough?
Imposter syndrome.
Yes, thank you. Um, I think I've got that pretty bad. Even though I currently work for Amazon, and our previous boss, Chris, has said, Amazon will beat the imposter syndrome out of you.
Yeah.
I don't really think that's happening. Uh,
It's interesting.
but
But it's topical. Like what you just said is um it's a great way to learn a lot of disparate things, and it's topical in our industry because our industry has heaped so many layers of abstraction on top of what existed just a few years or decades ago,
yeah,
that that is functionally your job, more and more people's job, regardless of which side they're on, whether on a pure, dev role or a more infrastructure role, is like you are gluing together components and trying to shape like a workflow that works for whatever you're trying to do. And it's so much less engineering a brand new thing and more, welding together a Frankenstein's monster of
yeah,
technology. And it's like it's great. I mean, I'm the same way, and it's great that for us that like our industry currently speaks massively to like our strengths, right? Which is this
oh yeah,
broad thinking, be creative, like cobble something together quickly, test a couple of kind of theories or hypotheses, and then just like roll it out and kind of move on to the next like large project. It's
yeah.
just like it's the nature of the work in many ways. So
Yeah, it's like it's slinging bash and YAML and JSON. And honestly, one of the things that I enjoyed most about I'm no longer doing, SRE or ops stuff, but on a given day, I could work with, half a dozen different languages, Go, Python, Ruby, Bash, um, kind of whatever previous people had done before me, and whatever I was trying to teach myself versus what I'm fluent with, and whatever wherever the problem solving leads me, and I always very much enjoyed that. So I don't have a whole lot of depth necessarily in really kind of any one thing. Although it's kind of accumulated over however many decades I've been doing this, but the ability to kind of explore different things and kind of always be picking up new tools is really fascinating to me.
for what it's worth, and I totally hear what you're saying, but for what it's worth, the imposter syndrome is strong with you because I know for a fact when I hear you say I don't have a lot of depth in any one thing, like I have seen you troubleshoot down to like the packet level on certain things. Like you have more depth than you think you do, is what I'm saying. But I think especially in our kind of like world and industry and the stuff that we're into, it's very easy to get imposter syndrome because you are always hyper aware. You have to be. The more you know, the more you realize you're just resting on the very top layer of this onion of complexity, where at any point something could go wrong where you suddenly need three lower layers than you have of
Yeah,
knowledge to figure out what exactly broke and how and why.
yeah,
um, and so it just like lends itself to this like, well, I really don't know what I'm doing. It's like, well, how deep do you want to go? It's like, yeah, I can't troubleshoot like a wired together computer logic machine, and look at logic gates to tell you what went wrong and like this accumulator or in your ALU, but like I work several layers of abstraction up and I'm just aware that there's this mountain of stuff that I don't know, which
yeah,
makes it very easy. And I think we do this to some degree too much of like worrying that we don't know much, because when you see, I mean, I don't know, if you feel bad about your skills, do a few phone interviews, because people are just Googling like, what does list in do in Linux, like live on the phone. Like that's part of who is getting into this industry. So, and I think that goes, and I call that out specific, not for you, but specifically for anyone listening, because I think a lot of people who are listening, a lot of people who watch my channel, they are in this mode of that is trying to counteract that imposter syndrome, where they're like, oh, I have to accumulate more skills and knowledge before I ever go apply to the job, or before I
Oh,
ever,
yeah.
like put myself out there. Because what if I don't know something in an interview? And that, like, I get that, and that's tempting, and it's kind of what we're talking about here, but it's pointless. Like, just start applying, just get out there, just do it, just start doing the work. Like, you'll figure it
Yeah.
out. Talk to people.
Yeah. I think two things immediately come to mind. One is my time as a WebSphere portal engineer, doing, as a software developer doing WebSphere portals. This is back in the mid 2000s, and my first indoctrination into the world of the IDE, which was Eclipse. With plugins for IBM's massive complexity, and I had a day where the system broke, and it took me weeks, a couple of weeks, to kind of like get back on top of what I was doing, because the IDE had a misfire somewhere, and it was just like everything was just broken. Um, and that was, everything was just so abstracted that your day-to-day work was, like wiring together portlets, writing some Java code,
I was just gonna
writing
say,
some.
everyone check your Java like thing on your bingo card right now,
Yeah.
because it's such a fucking Java story. And then
um,
everything was broken, and we thought,
yeah.
hey, why do we have machines managing the boilerplate? Do we need all of this?
So really kind of ever since then, I have eschewed the IDE, and my coworker Rich used to be like, dude, you would edit text with a magnetized needle in a steady hand.
My
you know.
favorite. Yeah, great comment.
So I kind of learned at an early age that you got to know how stuff works. Sorry, my dog is being an asshole. Um, I learned at an early age that I needed to understand how stuff works. Sooner or later, the abstractions are going to bite you, and I think there's something called like a leaky abstraction, like where a poorly defined abstraction allows the back stuff, the stuff behind to come through. Um, and yeah, so you need to understand the abstractions, and I think at some point you will end up having to understand how all of those pieces work together. All that abstraction has broken down. At some point, you need to understand how to wire it back together. Or maybe that's just where I've found my niche in being able to dive in and sort of understand some of that stuff.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense.
Um, the other thing I was thinking of real quickly is someone that we worked with at HashiCorp is sorry, OPSEC, that is reveal your employer.
No, no, no. I'm open about where I work. It's all good. I actually talked to Mitchell about it on my like second week, and I was like, "Is it cool?" And he's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
"Why are you asking me?" Yes, of course it's cool.
So there's a woman who was young, quite junior, but incredibly curious, and was really putting herself out there. She's like, man, she has got so much enthusiasm, that I think we should find a home for her, because she will go far.
Yeah,
And so yeah, I think it's that sort of like genuine personality and desire to learn, that, I mean, she has more enthusiasm than I do, but I think that's a powerful skill.
yeah. I think, but yeah, I think that's amazing that you call that out. Being able to display curiosity and enthusiasm in things like your cover letter, your screening interviews, like that, it'll get you far at companies that are the right companies, because people are
Right.
listening for that. It's like, yeah, it might not give you an advantage at like big corp. They might look at your cover letter and be like, it's not formal enough. You don't want to work there anyway. It's going to be a nightmare. It's all going to be like that. So if you, obviously, like, the world that we live in changes, it feels like every 6 months, and that's being generous. If you were starting over again today, where, um where would you kind of go in the industry? How would you go about, where would you look? Like, what kind of work would you try to do, and what would your kind of very basic strategy be for just how to quickly get started, get a paying job? You got motorcycles to rebuild, man.
You're assuming much more intentionality than I've ever exhibited in my entire life.
You can
Honestly,
you
if
can
I
answer this question by closing your eyes, getting up, and just bouncing around your room while flailing your arms.
yeah, I mean that's kind of it. I
That's
think
my career plan. That's
and it seems to be working fine for you so far. If I was literally starting over from scratch, and it's sort of like, hindsight is 2020, then I think I would have buckled down on some of the engineering and math stuff. And man, if I could have gone to a school that had like formula SAE, which is something that Tufts and many other schools do, but where basically it's students that get into building a race car, like that is a thing for me. Application of stuff, application of knowledge and hands-on is what engages me. And so if I had had that sort of opportunity, that maybe would have focused my interests
yeah,
and gotten me excited, that would have, I think, probably really kind of changed my trajectory.
yeah,
That being said, thinking about it, I think that those are the things that have kind of guided my path to where it is, such as it is.
yeah,
Is I've been interested in something and I've pursued it, and kind of listened, I guess, to my own interests. I remember, back when I was in Arizona, like, I was ostensibly a PHP developer. Yeah, I know, and that came back to us, a few years, 10 years later. Um, but I got into like packaging. I was like literally building RPMs of Oracle to ease the development environments and setup of production systems. So basically, every time I've had a job, I've always ended up leaning towards the operations aspects of it, so the sysadmin, back end sorts of things, and communications. Like, back at that job, I actually I set up Jabber, so that was sort of like in the pre-Slack era. Like my teammates spread across this one room that we all worked in. We could chat back and forth, and that was kind of cool. So I've always trended and tended towards those things. And I think I'm extremely fortunate that I've been able to somehow get actual, business value out of my work when all I really want to do is fuck around with computers.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, that's my story too. Yeah, I was just like, how can I get, it wasn't even getting paid for me. It was just like, how can I fuck around with more expensive computers than I can afford? You kind of alluded to the fact that like theory is important. And, one thing I think my brain is kind of tuned the same way as yours, where like I want to see the practical application quickly. Like so much of my YouTube channel is about that. Um, but my big sort of insight is, yeah, knowing more theory makes you much more powerful in terms of like how much leverage you can exert on the world, how big or complex the things you can build are, how good you actually are.
yeah,
And the practical, if you are somebody like that, then doing practical projects to learn skills are great, but use them and this is what I try to do on the YouTube channel, is use that to try to sneak in the enthusiasm that you're going to need to get through the theory for each thing. We're like, pick projects that require you knowing more theory than you do now. Like if you know nothing about networking, setting up a Jabber server is not bad, because you need to deal with like, you could do like a DNS, like an SRV record with like the little
yeah,
XMPP thing, and then setting up it's a network service, setting up the network service itself, dealing with firewalls, stuff like that, where it's like you're just required to dig deeper to do the practical thing that's motivating you to actually get up and try playing with tech. So
yeah.
it's something I recommend.
One of the things that I really appreciate about HashiCorp, and Terraform as an example, Terraform is basically applied graph theory. And I say that like I know what those words mean, but it's something where Mitchell and Armon really, they built a tool out of a very complex um, set of theories and data structures, and built that into something that is, incredibly powerful and understands the relationships between resources and all of this stuff. Console is an application of distributed systems that is just distributed computing models, and consensus that is something that my feeble brain can grasp. So there is so much that goes into those things, those tools, and being able to use them, being able to use them as an applied tool, I think is incredibly powerful, and that's something that I don't think there's a ton of in the industry, and yeah, so.
Huh, that's a really interesting thought. Yeah. So everyone listening, go find a really crazy piece of theory and build a cool implementation and build $1 billion company from it. It's cool. In the work that you've done, like more recently, what are the things that you find the most interesting about what you are doing day to day?
I think, again, this is. I wish I wish I had this clarity, way back when. But automation, anything that can be automated, do it, and that's sort of where, I guess is probably like one of the cornerstones of my skill set. I guess is automating things. Humans are dumb, and the more we can take humans out of the equation, the humans can be used for more useful things, and we remove human error from the equation, at the expense of complexity, sure, but there is no point in having a person repeatedly hit a button, when you can have a computer do that. And so my role today is basically, doing automation for embedded systems, for Alexa devices. Like how do we test those things? How do we reproduce bugs that customers have? How do we trace down memory leaks? How do we do this without having to put a person in front of a small screen and speak to it for days on end?
You could hire a bunch of small children as your QA.
Yeah, so I think that the application of what I've learned has changed, but that is, you're constantly building on stuff. You're constantly standing on the shoulders of giants. You're constantly standing on the shoulders of you from 6 months or 6 years ago. And yeah, and that's also, I think, why I'm pretty good at what I do. I can visualize and execute some pretty complex stuff. I also can't explain to my mom the difference between single and double clicking.
Hey everyone, I just want to give a big shout out to Linode for sponsoring this video. Whether you just want a temporary Linux box to mess around with and learn on, or a beefier personal server for a blog or portfolio site, or even a game or VPN server to share with your friends and family, Linode has you covered. And if you need to grow your business, Linode can scale up to reliably serve millions of visitors. Two things that really stand out for me, besides the fact that they offer Arch images. First, the number of pre-built images they offer that let you set up popular applications with a single click is pretty amazing. And second, the ability they give you to create custom images makes their platform a joy to work with. And yes, they even have a Packer builder, so you can start off strong with a real infrastructure as code workflow. Did I mention they have pre-built Arch servers? Here's the other thing. If you run into any trouble getting set up, Linode comes with amazing 24/7 customer support by phone, yeah, they have phones, or ticket, along with hundreds of tech guides and tutorials to help you get started. They've been around for a long time, and their reputation is amazing for a reason. If you sign up today at linode.com/tutoriallinux, you'll get a $100 60-day credit to use on your new Linode account. So just click the link in the description below, and you can be signed up in about 60 seconds.
You've covered this to some degree, but what are some things, is there anything specific about tech that, and I'll actually narrow this down because you've seen so many different things in the DevOps world as it is now, are there any things that really surprised you when you got into that, kind of knowing DevOps theory and seeing it develop, and then seeing the kind of execution of that where the rubber kind of hits the road, you know?
Yeah. It's all tied together with duct tape and baling twine. There is, for as much as every company tries to pitch themselves, with think pieces on, how well they've solved this problem, and how well this has worked to reduce whatever metric you're trying to find. When you go and work there, it's all crap. Um, so so I would love to be able to have gone into the Etsy that I had read about, back 10 years ago, where they monitored everything, and they had, everything was data driven, and they were on a pedestal of, at least in my mind, of a place that did everything right. But now that I've talked to people who have worked there, and I've worked for a couple of pretty notable companies, um, it is that's kind of window dressing. When it comes down to it, like everybody's got their their skeletons, and so kind of be prepared for that, I guess. Like you will learn no matter what, but you're probably not going to learn what you thought you were going to learn.
Yeah. I think that's a fantastic thing to tell people. I agree. I think the branding in a lot of these tech companies is so good, that the best you can hope for is that you have a team that's really smart and dedicated and kind, and that is really genuinely trying to work towards a good, positive vision of like DevOps and all this, and SRE and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But I think again, this talks to the imposter syndrome. People feel like, oh, I'm not ready because I'm not a real SRE. It's like, well, neither is anyone else. So,
yeah,
we're all just gluing things together, trying to come up with abstractions that aren't crazy, trying to keep complexity from leaking out, trying to build systems that are reliable, that are resilient, that are kind of intuitive to use, secure, etc. If you, and it comes down to what you said before, is like curiosity and enthusiasm and just honesty and the ability and willingness to work hard at trying to make something better. Like if you have those things, just the basics of tech will be enough, like for someone to give you a chance and give you a place to continue growing. Yeah,
for sure. I think I don't know. I haven't figured out how you kind of determine this ahead of time, unless you kind of know people on the inside of a place that you're looking to get hired at. But the things that I remember most are not the, God, this is going to be so fucking cheesy. The real things you learn are the friends along the way.
Let's just put a high school yearbook image here while you
yeah, totally. Please,
I think we have our thumbnail. Just that sweet, innocent face.
Yeah. I've made it has been the personal connections that I've made with people that have really kind of brought me place to place. So I have not really had direction, and I've kind of gone where things have been interesting. And sometimes that has been because a friend has reached out and been like, hey, I hear you're looking for work, or I'm at this place and we could really use some more people with your skills. So that networking is by far the most effective, and I'm very scornful of recruiters in general.
There's this fake idea of networking that kind of like pervades different industries, right? Where it's just like cold call a lot of people, shake a lot of hands, be like fake nice, go to meetups or whatever, and that's fine. Those things can work, sure, but the real networking that gets stuff done is you just have people that know you're a good person, that know you're not BSing, that you are actually skilled and that you're going to try to work hard, and that already have some trust with you. Like that's your network, and the more trustworthy and good you are, the better your network will be. And the more opportunity, random opportunities will happen. It's like that.
And I don't know how much sort of like social justice stuff you get into on your in the topics that you present, but I'm saying this as middle-aged white guy to a slightly less middle-aged white guy, like it's pretty easy for us to kind of, people look like us. It's sort of easy to get jobs because, I have a name like Brian, you have a name like Dave.
Yeah. Like this
And
assumed rapport, like, oh yeah, a lot of
yeah,
advantages there.
right. And so I honestly don't know, so I'm not going to speak authoritatively, but I suspect that I know that it is harder for people, who don't look like me to get into the industry and to sort of maintain their uh, to continue to be valued for the type of work that they do, and be given opportunities regardless of what they look like or where they came from.
Yeah.
And so I have to think that networking is even more important, to kind of build those personal relationships and keep in touch with them. And I say this as someone that does a really terrible job at it. That is very valuable. So kind of think back on how I've kind of landed where I've landed, and almost all of it has come down to just to connections. And I recognize that it is harder to get interviewed, for many people, for people who are not middle-aged white guys.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's the flip side of networking is it gives me much more pleasure to help refer somebody to somewhere where they may not have gotten in the front door, maybe not even because of racism or whatever, but just because they don't have the traditional background. For whatever reason it is, a lot of people face a lot more barriers than you and I do. And that's like the most gratifying part of networking is being able to link together other people, and being able to open doors for other people is like, yeah, I mean, it's almost like it's not selfish, but it's almost selfishly pleasurable, where you're just like, yes, like I helped make this person's life better. You just like, it's a good feeling to have, to see someone's life improve measurably and be like, I had some influence on this. I was able to do something for once,
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyone watching, you use your privilege and your power if you've got it to help other people. I mean, that's like, I don't think anyone has to say that, but well, yes, we live in this world. I do have to. So that's cool. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. So the last question was sort of not about skills specifically. This one is specifically about skills. What are some skills that you notice the newest batch of kind of new tech folks are neglecting, or just like don't come equipped with it? They have to learn quickly when they kind of hit the real world, thinking more like new grads or just more inexperienced folks.
I don't really have a lot of experience to draw on from that. I haven't, sort of to my detriment, I have not worked with a ton of people coming into the industry. I think things that are maybe overlooked are communication, being able to describe problems, being able to write clear, concise code. And maybe I'm a bit of an asshole, maybe a bit OCD, but spelling matters. And and complete sentences. There was a guy that I worked with who was just like, every commit was fix this thing. Like, God damn it! Like,
I mean, yeah, that's not you being an asshole, because if anyone that does that in 6 months will know that they are an asshole for doing it, because they won't be able to find where they made that change, or like, your Git log, an entire massive feature of Git, it becomes useless to you when every Git blame shows fixed thing or whatever. It's like, okay,
yeah, oh yeah,
I'll just go through the entire history of this project to figure out what's going on. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Yeah, and I think I don't know what the kids are using these days.
They're on the JavaScript still, I think.
But it seemed like there was a time where people were coming in, where I'm interviewing people, which I hate doing, by the way, that are coming in and they don't have, sort of basic Linux skills.
Yes.
And maybe like in sort of a DevOps type of role, that's necessary.
Yeah.
And you probably just need to build up to that. But I do think that's part of understanding command line stuff, how to move around in a Linux shell and to be effective there. You will be more effective and you will learn more than if you expected everything to be in a GUI.
Yeah. Yeah, you're kidding yourself if you think, oh, if I don't regularly have to log in and troubleshoot stuff on Linux machines, I don't need to know or understand Linux or have command line skills. It's indispensable. Like, I don't care if you just build Docker files all day and have lambdas everywhere. Like your Circle CI thing, that's a shell environment. And if you don't know how to use it, you're going to spend a lot of wasted time on doing very simple tasks. Um, yeah, likewise, there's just a million examples of things not only that still use the shell in some like legacy sense, but where shell scripting and like built-in things in Linux are the fastest by far way of doing something. One of my favorite tech bloggers who never blogs anymore, Steve Yegi, he, if I'm pronouncing that right, he has this interesting like interview questions post where he basically goes through like 10 interview questions he asks and why specifically and what they show about people. And one thing he asks is basically like, oh, if I have, like an input file that is a phone book and I ask you to find like something that's like testing, like, do you know regex and will you use the command line to string together with pipes a little bash command to find something? And he's like, I've had people write 5,000 line C programs to do this, and it's disqualifying. I don't care how good your C code is. It's like if you don't understand that this is like a tool in your toolbox and you're familiar with it, just the basics of it, and you realize that's the fastest way to do it. That's because we are glue people, and clearly we always have been. Like your job is to usually just do things clean, fast, like reliably, and cracking open an editor. If you're not having real second thoughts about starting a new software project, then you might not have the proper respect yet for complexity, the size of the task of maintaining a code base, etc. All this stuff we try to avoid. So
yeah, I mean, you're quickly going to cut yourself on sharp edges. But if you're writing a program and you need to find a line and whatever, open a file and grep for something, sometimes it's okay to just shell out to it. Like you don't have to import libraries and write the code. Like prove your point first. And also be mindful that proving your point will probably end up in production someday, and you'll wish that it hadn't.
Yes.
But you ultimately,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's a balance to be struck there.
But that's why you have to just get really good at prototyping. See, it still matters. Because even if you plan everything out, it's like the design prototype then makes it into production, which is arguably worse than the practical prototype making it there.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, sorry, we can never change this again because we thought about it wrong 2 years ago, and now everything's built on that horrible, like wrong abstraction of the problem. Future predictions, this is just, it's not even in the form of a question, which I like. I just added a question mark at the end. Future predictions for tech DevOps, kind of like tech processes and how the tech world will develop. So this, I literally wrote this, and everyone I'm asking this question, it's based on a conversation we had probably 6 years ago during our interview. You were interviewing me, and we kind of got off on this shared love for the Hashi stack, but more specifically about what that represented to us in terms of, it was like finally a modern like cloud tool thing that kind of expressed or implemented a lot of these principles that we both respect, like simplicity, small sharp tools, the kind of Unix way. They took that off the website, which I'm still sad about, but I get it. We're an enterprise company now. But so, and we kind of felt like all this complexity that's happening, like these tools are going to be big because they represent like all the wisdom of those simpler, more concise, very powerful and composable solutions, and like they're going to catch on, and lo and behold, a bunch of them did. Sitting here now, obviously many things have changed. How I don't know, what do you like? Is there anything that's interesting to you in tech? Any place that you think things are drifting or going? Anything you can kind of see in the future or imagine?
I feel like I've kind of taken a year off in terms of like observing the industry. I'm sort of using a new set of tools and in some ways using stuff that I learned, 20 plus years ago. I do a lot of Python, almost exclusively Python now. But I think that, honestly, I think so much is going towards Kubernetes, and that scares the shit out of me. Because it is the antithesis of that. It is everything in one in what feels like a huge monolithic complex system. And I know I'm not alone in thinking this, but it's sort of like the tension between the people who want to consume the latest and greatest and really cool tools. And don't get me wrong, Kubernetes has some really cool stuff going on. But there are people who have to operate it at some point, especially when you get into the newest, most exciting stuff. You don't have Amazon and Google and I guess Microsoft who are providing these Kubernetes as a service, for example, and all the guises that has. And so understanding how the stuff works, being able to peek behind the abstractions, work your way, through the problem that you will inevitably have, even if you're using a hosted solution. I think it's very important to understand how those things fit together. And I am very wary of anything that makes it magical, because there is no magic. So I think it's amazing what people are doing with the tools that are being built around Kubernetes. And I wish that Nomad had really Nomad is HashiCorp's product, which has kind of always been in the shadows. I think that it is objectively a better tool, but did not capture the industry's attention. And if I had to build a system, I would absolutely prefer to operate Nomad than Kubernetes and all that I would have to know about Kubernetes in order to
and
run it.
No one even has an answer to that criticism, which is a completely valid criticism that I also have, which is like, but what about the insane complexity? It's like, well, you just like push that onto your cloud provider, which like is not really an answer. It's like, yes, they can do better running some of the components, but it's not a perfect abstraction. And like you said, there is no magic anywhere. Like when that system breaks down in any way, you're still dealing with Go, Bash, like Docker, like local, like little virtual, like art tables and like a networking stack that's running on a Linux kernel. It's like whenever I just think that abstraction feels it can be incredibly powerful, I think, but also it's skin deep because it relies on everything that you already know underneath. And maybe that's some usable like advice for people is like, if you use one of these systems, make sure to dig down below the layer that you need, because I think like I keep seeing like blog posts of companies where it's like, oh, we switched to Kubernetes and everything's like super great. Oh, and then we had our first outage and everyone realized they didn't understand IP tables. It's like, well, I'm sorry, everything's going through NetFilter. Like that's a problem if no one understands what you're doing, yeah. So I agree. I think that it's one of these industry things that I think is a pattern. I've seen it long enough now for it to be a pattern. I remember there's this article, I forget who wrote it. Was it one of those Cat B articles? I don't know. Worse is better or something. It's about like the things that win in like the collective like tech the industry. And often like the worst abstractions win for all kinds of interesting reasons. And I've used, not in production, but I've played around with Kubernetes to some degree. I've used Nomad in production. And to me, the real difference between them is, one of them is a kind of almost one size fits all kind of like idea. Like you have to buy into all of these abstractions. You're using containers, like too bad. Like if you have some old VMs, like they're not running on Kubernetes. it's like it requires you gotta drink all the Kool-Aid to use it, and then kind of build your systems around it, right? It becomes the shape of your organization, essentially. I mean, your kind of tech stack. Whereas more flexible and configurable tools are, and I think this is why they end up losing, is things like Nomad, things that you can reshuffle or put together in different ways that can really adapt to the shape that your business already has. They're just harder to adopt because there's decision making involved. Like when you adopt Kubernetes, there are few decisions about the shape of that the thing is going to take.
Right.
And I think I really wonder if that's just like people don't want to deal with it. They're just like, give us the thing, we'll work with it. And no one wants to have like an internal, I don't know that this is it, but you need a lot of internal expertise to, in both cases. But in the Kubernetes case, you can lie to yourself and tell yourself you don't actually need to retain a lot of internal expertise to troubleshoot it if anything goes wrong.
Yeah.
Whereas you can't lie to yourself that way when you're like, well, we're going to architect like an internal like Nomad thing that's going to run everything. It's like, that's very clearly a job for an expert, at least at first.
Yeah, and I feel like the phrase that comes to mind is undifferentiated heavy lifting, which is, people say, well, just use Amazon, use EKS, use, whatever. To a large extent, using the cloud is paying someone else to do the undifferentiated heavy lifting. So the idea being that you want to pay somebody to build your application, not to run your infrastructure, because everybody has infrastructure. And I kind of feel like that gulf is getting wider because people will come in and say, well, I'm going to write this thing and deploy it on Kubernetes, and bam, it's in production. And probably there is value in not racking and stacking your own servers. I certainly don't have any desire to do that, but not just delegating all of that, or even abdicating all of that responsibility to someone else, means that you're not prepared when something does inevitably go bump. And frankly, I sort of enjoy doing the undifferentiated heavy lifting. That's sort of the layer that I enjoy the most. And I guess I've really never wanted to write business level software. But yeah, so I think that I struggle with that, because I often hear like, well, that's where the cool stuff happens.
Yeah, I agree. But I think it's exactly what you just said, actually, is why I disagree with that undifferentiated heavy lifting. Building a truly great platform gives your application an advantage. And I think it's just the perspective that a lot of these decisions get made from. It's like whatever's in like CEO Weekly or whatever is like, whatever makes it up there, or even CIO Weekly or whatever. That is just sort of like, oh, that's just the accepted wisdom now. But and a lot of that is the application is where all the differentiation and value creation in the organization happens. And that's been that stupid wrong insight has been, I mean, how many years have like ops and dev folk been sort of quasi at war, and we had a whole DevOps thing to try to make it better. And it's like, it's because companies see value in new features and don't see a platform as something capable of delivering new features. Like, is it not a feature if your platform can suddenly go on in a new region to be legally compliant with serving traffic to a brand new section of the world? That's not an application feature, but does that not, double the amount of value you can suddenly provide? It's like, I don't, and yeah, like to some degree, that's still something you can outsource, but you can also outsource your app development. Lots of people do that. So I just don't see them being all that different. Like, either you're an engineering company that can generate value in all the engineering it does, or you just kind of accept that you're an old school company with a dev department that gets run like with this magic special agile sauce that's different from everything else. And they're like the golden children. Again, nothing against pure dev work. That perspective just misses so much of the value, I think, that infrastructure can provide. I know I'm biased because I come from kind of an infrastructure background, but I do product work now, and it's like I still believe that. What's that?
3 whole days.
Yeah. Basically what you call a product veteran. I like that. I had to have that thought when I said I still believe that. I was like, Dave, it was this week. It's been so long. I've managed to hold on to that infrastructure centric belief. Yeah. Anyway, this is the stuff that gets cut out of YouTube, Brian. You wanted to know what it was. It's this. Dave's wild and wacky unsubstantiated claims. Yeah, that's what the people want. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I mean, I'd be lying if I said we didn't do this every 2 weeks anyway and just shoot the shit, but thank you for sitting here through like such focused questioning, which is unusual for me. And for just like sharing. I actually learned a ton of interesting stuff about your sorted tech past that I didn't know before, which is super interesting. And I think so much of what you said is really going to help people, especially people that watch the YouTube channel or are listening to this as a podcast, who are just on that kind of imposter syndrome doorstep that you described. You know, like they haven't even jumped in yet, or their early career, and they're just like, I don't know where to go next. I don't know what I can do, and they feel kind of limited, but just by their current job or their current situation. And I think it's just like your story and like your path kind of proves that there's a limited amount of planning you can do because of how quickly things move in our industry. And like, you know, you may have the best intentions, but like there was literally no way for you to make a plan to get into DevOps when you started, because DevOps was not a glimmer in a hipster's eye yet. It was, so you just gotta kind of having that mindset of just like being open-minded about opportunities, just resolving to be competent at the work that you do, and being good to the people around you is a career plan. Like that is a career plan. That's how it works. So yeah. Thanks, man.
Right on. Thank you very much. This was very enjoyable. And please let me know when the director's cut comes out.
Yeah, exactly. As always, leave all your comments and stuff below. If you have any more questions that you would like to ask Brian, I will take the best comments and ask Brian, and then either write you an answer or we'll do another one of these.
All right, very good. Smash that like button or something.
Oh, whoa, out of nowhere. Like the fucking pro. Do you just want to take over the channel, honestly? Because
no.
You did good, Brian. I did not ask you to do that. All right.
Just ring that bell.
Yeah. Who are you?
Someone who has spent too much time watching.
You have some like YouTube ASCII like streaming thing in the shell where you are? You can't see these videos. This isn't in YAML.
Links, baby. Links browser is the way of the future.
Yeah, okay.
It works anywhere.
Links 2. apt-get install Links 2. Best browser ever. Cool. Thanks again, dude.
You're welcome.
See
Talk to you later.